Okay, guys, thank you for tuning in. Today, I'm very happy to have Kirby Schepp on the show. Kirby is currently the head coach at the University of Manitoba and has been for the last 10 years. He has coaching experience that streams all the way from U13 to the national level in Canada. One of the things that drew me most to Kirby is his obvious passion for the game and his ability to help players of all ages. I can tell that Kirby puts a lot of thought into his coaching development to make learning fun and effective at all levels. So, Kirby, thank you for coming on and welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, William. Happy to be here. Excited to talk to you today.
Cool. So, why don't you go ahead and just get us started by telling us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and how you got into basketball, and then how you eventually got into coaching.
Right. So I'm fortunate enough to live and work in my hometown here. I'm from Winnipeg, Manitoba, which is kind of right center, smack dab in the geographical middle of Canada. And yeah, I came up like most people. Played the game, from a pretty young age. I didn't really start as young as kids do now, probably about 13 or so, and just eventually fell in love with it. I think originally I ended up just trying to beat my brother in one-on-one, and started training and getting better, and just never left it, I guess. And eventually got good enough to play college basketball in Canada, and somehow got kind of roped into coaching a little bit. And I started coaching actually as soon as I left high school at a very young junior high. I would be like 12, 13-year-old kids. And then when I was done playing, went back and did high school ball, and coached that all the way up, and really started then getting a passion for coach education, and coached about 5 to 6 teams a year for the next 15 years or so. And then when I went on to university, I also became coaching with the national team program. I've been really fortunate to coach with the Canadian national team program, I guess, for the last 12 years, something like that, and mostly at the age group level. So though, once it would be a senior development level, I was coaching with the Commonwealth Games in Australia. And so yeah, I've been really fortunate to be involved in the game, still have a passion for it, and have a real passion for coach education as well. As you've probably seen a number of the videos online or different clinics I've run. And yeah, it's been certainly a great journey that I've been fortunate enough to take me around the world and experience the game in lots of different places.
Nice, nice. So again, you've been talking about coach education, and one of the things that really drew me to you was your very popular video, Don't Teach Plays, Teach Them How to Play. And that's such a unique style, especially when the training industry now is now an industry, the training of basketball. How do you come across that style of teaching? And is that philosophy applied to most coaches where you are?
Yeah, I think so. For me, that would have come from my college coaches. Probably my biggest mentor in coaching, a guy by the name of Bill Wedlake, and he used that phrase, or something similar to play, something similar to that phrase in terms of, I think that was also a timeline where coaches still ran very controlled offenses. The shot clock was a little bit longer, or in the United States even, would have been recently non-existent, right? Where the shot clock wasn't around at all. So you see more pattern style, and the flex offense, and the 22 option UCLA high post, and all these different things. It would be more what I would call a paint by numbers approach, right, to basketball, where it was, it's like I don't know if you know paint by numbers, but so where you'll have a piece of artwork, and you have a little outlining. Okay, this has the color number 2. This is color number 3. This is color number 4, right? So that would be, the opposite of where I am. And, we started, I think I probably took that, phraseology and what my coach said, and took it to another level. And now I look at the game more as you're trying to create problem solvers in athletes, right? You're trying to create people that can find solutions to problems and have the skill sets to be able to execute those solutions to problems, right? So that's certainly the way I coach now. I think for me, I don't know if it would necessarily be the norm, but it's certainly spreading where I am. I think that it's certainly a growing way to teach. Certainly for those of us that love the game and are player-centered coaches, that style of coaching is certainly growing. I think there still is certainly a significant faction of people that want to have more control as a coach. I think that's one of the drawbacks of it, is that you have less control over the athletes, and they may do things that don't necessarily exactly reflect what you want them to do, and you have to have some willingness to do that. So is it going that way? Yes, I think it is. Is it completely that way now? No, I would say not yet.
Okay. And so just to go off that, obviously learning is not linear. And do you see that maybe, although in the long term, the retention is obviously greater, I don't think anybody can argue with that, but is the learning process a little bit slower initially because it is problem solving rather than giving them the solution?
100%. And as my old coach would say, do you want to win early or do you want to win late?
Right.
And I think that's the hard part. And there's a lot there, that factors into that. Right. So, I mean, I had and this, again, this is a bit of a cultural thing, I would say, where I was talking with some friends of mine that, or players even that were thinking of going to the US to play college basketball versus going to Canada, different things. And, they talked about how, kids that go down to the US, oftentimes they'll have to go to schools that have much more structure than ours would. And there are certain things they're not allowed to do. And I would say, well, you can maybe look negatively on, say, those coaches, those programs, but at the same time, they don't have the same job security that I do, right? Whereas a college coach in the US will, they lose a few games in a row, they're going to be fired pretty quickly, right? Whereas I'm still going to be fired if I lose, but it's going to be if I don't develop a program, and if I lose over a much longer period, right, then I'm going to lose my job. So I have the freedom to be able to do that, whereas some other coaches may not have that freedom, right? So to me, I think there's a number of things that kind of factor into why that is, or what allows you to be able to coach that way. But you're certainly right that that there's a patience involved there, right? That has to be had by a lot of people involved. So.
Right, and working with youth, and especially with parents coming in to watch or getting involved, it's sometimes difficult to explain, have the conversation with them why their child is not getting immediately better and can't do layups with both hands and different types of layups. So yeah, I completely understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things, right, that I still believe like there's a value to an old school way of, of just getting 1,000 repetitions, especially with novel skills. And when kids are starting learning things right from the start, and there's a value to it, but it's just not the only thing. And they need to be able to solve problems and that kind of stuff. But I think it's the most important thing for coaches is to be transparent about that philosophy really early with your sport administrators, people who put you in your position, but also with parents, with players, with letting them know that, hey, we're going to do it in this way. And you're right, you used the great term when you said it's not necessarily linear. It's not like, like if I want to, yesterday I was working on, I'm trying to learn how to play guitar right now, right? So I could just do chord changes back and forth over and over and over, or I could start to just learn how to play. Well, when I'm just learning how to play, it's going to be pretty ugly. It's not going to sound very good. It's going to be kind of, right? But at the same time, I think my learning is, while it's going like this, we're still going to get there. And I think we can get to even a farther place than we would get in that sort of more linear fashion.
Right. Well, we'll come back to that. But listening to you talk and watching numerous videos that you have on YouTube, you obviously have a lot of exposure to the international world when it comes to basketball. And what does the Canadians and the Americans do that is maybe a little bit different from, say, the Europeans and the South Americans when it comes to basketball development?
Well, I think in some ways, I think we're inferior, I would say, to many of the Europeans in terms of style of play, in terms of them playing a 5-person game, right? Whereas it's a little bit more individualistic, where, learning how to break down your player and score one-on-one and that kind of stuff. that is valued, I'd say, at a younger age more, and kids develop that, but they don't understand like pick and roll reads till much after, and spacing, and using triangles and passing and things like that. I think there's a number of factors why I think that is, but I think that's something that we do poorer. But I think we have a bigger pool of athletes in terms of just our raw size, athletic ability, things like that. That's obviously a huge advantage to us in North America, certainly in the US. And I think for us as well, as the game has grown in Canada, I think we have better athletes. But, and then I think there's other pieces too, like in terms of, certainly in some of the other countries, they streamline their sports programs differently, I think, than we do, right? Whereas, in many European countries, you might, if you're interested in sport, or you sort of show an aptitude for sport at a very early age, you're put into a sports school immediately, and you're on the sports stream, right? So to me, that sometimes inhibits the late bloomer. That inhibits, and it also inhibits them from other things too, in terms of them learning certain higher level of academic and professional things. Whereas I think that's probably the one strength for me of that we link our athletics to our academics as well. So if you're in a good athletic school, you're probably also in a good academic school as well, a lot of times, right? So I think there's some life advantages there, I think, that can help kids, right? So not just outside of basketball, right? So they get further education and things like that. So for us, being good at sport is a tool for getting more education. Whereas sometimes in some other countries, being good at sport means education's now over here, and now we're gonna focus on this aspect. So I think there's pros and cons, I guess is what I'm saying, in terms of different aspects of it, right? So
I can't think of a better word for this, but just listening to what you say, the Europeans are good at, it seems like you're talking about basketball. Let's call it basketball IQ. Sure, like understanding of the game. Generally, what age would you learn that? Even though I played in high school in America, what age would you generally learn that across the board in North America? Like the pick and roll, learning to play a triangle, like what age?
Right.
High school, college?
And I think that's one of the challenges that we have is it really depends on where you are, whereas some other countries might be a little more systematic of that, right? But here it's really dependent on, where you are, right? And what kind of a program you're in. If you're in a really good high school program, you're probably going to get a pretty good aspect of spacing and that kind of thing. But unfortunately, some of the most talented kids, they get pulled from those programs where they're being showcased, and they love to use the word exposure, right? And they're trying to get somewhere. So sometimes they lose some of that development, and they're just more, carted around like show horses, right? That are just wanting to be sold to auction to the highest bidder a little bit. So whereas they don't, sometimes they get limited in some of that, larger scale basketball IQ, because they lose some of the coaching piece, but they gain the exposure piece, and they gain people seeing them and seeing their talents and things like that. But yeah, I think certainly, once you get to a college age, that's probably for most kids, for me especially, like when we first get kids, they think of pick and roll as, if they've had bad coaching, a one-person skill.
Oh, wow.
You screen my guy, and I'm going to try to score on your guy as he helps, right? And if they've had reasonable, coaching, they think of pick and roll as a two-person activity.
Okay.
You screen me, I come off of it, now you're open on the roll, I hit you, right? Whereas by the time now, it's not really until later college where they think of pick and roll as a five-person activity. Or first would be a three-person. So here's the person that's going to help on the roll. I got to make that read, rather than seeing it, at a professional level as a five-person activity, both offensively and defensively, right? So I think pick and roll is a good analogy, or a good piece to see at the game, and to see like, what is basketball IQ? So is that a one-person activity? Is it two? Is it three? Or is it five? Right. So for us, I think most kids don't really see it as a five-person thing till they're, third or fourth year of college. Right?
Wow. Okay.
A lot of times, right? So, and I think that's a negative, right? So. in many ways.
And I think the reason I'm asking you this is I'm a mediocre athlete, and like you said, one of the strengths of North America is just the sheer crop of athleticism that they have. So for
Right.
someone such as myself, right, someone who can't jump with them or run as fast and cut as well, all that kind of stuff, we would have to rely on that type of play to even be
Sure.
like held in the same breath with them on the same court. So that's just the
Right.
reason I'm asking. And so that's very,
Right.
very interesting.
And it's great. So I've often wondered from my perspective is, wow, so what if we were able to get that basketball IQ in our athletes? Like, I think the greatest, the example is also shown even on the highest level. And it's not like if in the NBA, like, you can't tell me LeBron James doesn't know pick and roll and
Right.
IQ, and he does. He's phenomenal at it, right?
Right.
So, but at the same point, it's the great equalizer is the skill and those problem-solving abilities. So, like, if you took a team, let's say you took your team and you went to a tournament, and you played a team, and the team you were playing didn't have a single player who, based on their individual ability, could make your roster. Not a single one. So their best player is not quite as good as your 12th best player.
Okay.
Well, I think you would expect to beat that team by 40,
Right.
50, right? You would expect to destroy them. So how is it possible that the U.S. can go and have like an 8-point game against Australia?
Right. Right.
That's what's happening there, right? I mean, Australia's best guy, whether it's
Bogut
Andrew Bogut or
yeah.
Patty Mills or whatever, they're not as good as the USA's 12th player, right? So it's, it's interesting to look, but somehow through the game and through the way it's played and through, I think to me that's the beauty of it. They can have a really competitive game with the US and even in sometimes beat them, right? So I think to me that's the real interesting piece of it in terms of getting that broader IQ, right?
It's interesting because the other day I was watching the States against it wasn't '08. It was maybe no. It was with a young Manu Ginobili on their team. The Argentines with a young Manu Ginobili.
Probably would have been the 2000 Indianapolis team the World Championship in Indianapolis, which I want to say was right before the Sydney Olympics, was 2000, I think it was.
Okay.
Could that have been? Because I studied that game a lot. I think I know exactly what you're talking about.
And after watching that game, I said to myself, I have to watch this game another 10 times because it was just the difference of play was just tremendous. And the individual talent of each American player was tremendous. But they really struggled on a team like Argentina that plays so together. And it seemed like every time Argentina comes down the floor, it wasn't that they were playing one-on-one or even two-on-two. It was they could read the game at a pace that was so fast, and they could make the right read and execute with precision. And it was just mind-blowing because it was so easy for them on offense.
Right.
They ended up losing, but it was just something that I learned a lot from.
Interesting. So it's not maybe the one that I studied.
Okay.
But when I was a high school coach, we studied that tournament. So really interesting. I happen to know more about this than I probably should. Or you're going to think I'm a total basketball nerd here. Was like we would study that tournament where I think the U.S. came third or even fourth, I think, in that tournament. Anyways, it was like you say, it was a young Manu Ginobili. It was what Argentina calls their golden generation, right? Of young Luis Scola, young Luis Sanchez, and Carlos Delfino, and all those guys were real young and coming up. And that tournament, Argentina led the tournament in assists and led the tournament in field goal percentage. And they played a phenomenal style of play. And U.S. had people like Allen Iverson and
Stephon.
Right, and they were and it was very individual, and but to their credit, I mean, they're literally thrown together, have a 2-week training camp, and play in a tournament. Some of these guys have never played together, and coaches have never coached together. Their systems aren't very precise and things like that. So, but it's really interesting to to look at it and look at how is it possible that this team could beat this team? And you start to really look at the greater aspect of it. And I used to use that game as a way to teach young kids about the value of team play and the value of developing this understanding of the game. To me, it's an absolute great example. And then the U.S. changed, right? I mean, that was when Mike Krzyzewski came in a couple years later. They still lost in Athens and came over, and they didn't necessarily take an all-star team. They tried to construct things differently, and they tried to build a broader level of team play. And I think the cool part about it is to watch every time the U.S. has had to up their bar, because they're certainly still the bar in the world in terms of basketball. Every time they've had to up their bar, the rest of the world has also, I think, gotten better in basketball too, which is pretty cool. So
Yeah, definitely. So just going off that international subject, where do you feel like the game of basketball is headed internationally, including the United States? What is the style, and how can we prepare our young players around the world for basketball now and in the future?
yeah, it's interesting to look at that, right, and to see like I think there's some obvious ones that are already here. More five-out offense, more positionless play, which leads to more switching defenses. I think, if you can get a team of, similar sized players that can switch everything and play in different aspects all over the floor. I mean, I think we're seeing that even more so than we've seen it before, right? I mean, obviously at the highest level, if you have Kevin Durant and Giannis, you can be pretty good, right? Where you got, a couple players who can literally play every single position, are extremely skilled. But I think we're also seeing a little bit more complex defensive schemes at the highest level, right? Where we're seeing, more changing defenses, a little bit more zones, a little bit more complex, almost run and jump style, switching things and pick and roll, right? So because of that, I think you're even seeing less kind of patterned style of play, and it's even more so in terms of skill development, problem solving, that type of thinking of the game, rather than, people aren't going to let you run a specific system, or they're going to change the way they cover things, and you're just going to have to make kind of reads on the fly, right? So I think, to me, I think it's what's showing is skill wins, right, above all other things. So obviously, certainly it helps to be big and helps to be athletic, but ultimately, it's become a skill game more than anything. I think today's players are more skilled than they've ever been, and smarter than they've ever been. And to me, it's we're at a pretty cool place in terms of the game and where it's going from that perspective. So
Right. So just going off that skill component, and if you look at practice and looking at elements of, say, skill acquisition, and even if you look at some of the science, it's very apparent that teaching the game teaches the players better than the coach can teach the players. But as a coach, when is there a time that you can interject and maybe add value to your players when they're playing in either in a game or in practice, especially?
right, and that's really interesting I think that's one of the more fascinating pieces of coaching is you're trying to, that art of like when to give feedback, right? And what type of feedback to give. And I think the old school method of like players that were sort of constantly coaching, right, is I think it's going away a little bit. And like you said, I mean, I think you have to allow the athlete room to self-reflect, right? And to sort of, and rather than telling them what to do, rather than, I oftentimes use the term, are you teaching or are you instructing, right? So am I telling you, am I giving you instructions, or am I helping guide you to a different place, right? In terms of your learning and things like that. And I think that's an interesting kind of way to look at it. So for me as a coach, that's, to me, is the one thing, that's my gas pedal, right? Where I'm kind of feathering it a little bit, where I'm like, am I putting on the gas? Am I taking off the gas here? Am I taking my foot completely off the pedal here? Am I just kind of gradually, am I slowly doing it here in terms of how much am I going to tell this player? Sometimes I have to consciously tell myself, okay, shut up now. They've made a mistake. Let's step back and let them learn from it. Or sometimes it might be just feathering the gas pedal a little, where I'll pull them aside and I'll say, what did you think of that? where when you were in this position, what did you see there? Sometimes I'll even let someone else do the skill and take that athlete out and have them stand at a certain angle where they can watch. And I'll say, I want you to watch where this defender is or what they're doing here. And then I'll start to ask them. So I can actually remove them from it and start to look at it. So I can let the play give them feedback and guide them through that. Or sometimes I put my pedal down because it's urgent, because we need something to stop right away. We see something that absolutely is a hard stop, deal breaker, can't do that, where you have to interject and say, no, don't do that, do this, or great job, that's exactly what we want, right? And I think so. If I can take that further, the concept there, what I'm using is what I would call bandwidth feedback, right? So in anyone doing any skill, there's a range of outcomes, right? So someone might do a skill at an extremely high level over here, or they might do a skill at an extremely low level where, they're just performing really badly, or they're a really poor outcome, really great outcome. The question is, so they're going to be somewhere on that spectrum, right? So where are you going to provide feedback? Are you going to provide feedback in all cases, no matter what they do? Are you going to provide feedback only when they do something great? Are you going to say, hey, great job, and then say nothing? Are you going to provide feedback when it's horrible only? And if they do it great, just let it be, just say nothing. Or is there probably a window sort of in the middle where you're just going to let it happen, where there's an acceptable level of performance that doesn't necessarily need an affirmation or or something back from them? Whereas if they only do it incredibly well, hey, great job, that was great. Or if they only do it really poorly. And I think there's no one answer on what's right. I think as a coach, that bandwidth is moving, right? Depending on your situation, might depend on how close you are to a game, might be depending on the age and stage of the athlete. How new is the skill that they're doing, right? So, and I think that's, to me, the art of coaching in terms of when are you going to do that? How is that going to change and flux? And I think there's no hard, rule on that, but as a coach, being aware, of where that is. So I don't know if I made a good explanation of that, if that makes sense. But
it makes complete sense. And you talked about, say, let's just call it the traditional model of learning where you get up 1,000 shots. So let's just say whatever that is. For you, where does the value of that lie? And the reason I'm asking is because Mike McKay, who we both respect I respect him a tremendous amount, always said that it gives you comfort and confidence. And I think that that's a huge piece for basketball players or any athletes, because you need a lot of that. But say, for example, you're dealing with a skill like shooting, where everybody it's kind of like your signature. Everybody has a different shot. How do you give instructions to certain skills, keeping in the back of your mind that everybody has a different shot? And how do you give them feedback and instructions without them thinking too much?
It's really interesting. So I think the important thing, it's interesting, I was just reading this book the other day. There's a great book out there called The Inner Game of Tennis.
Oh, yeah.
I wish I could tell you who the author is, but Inner Game of Tennis, and it's not necessarily all about tennis, but it's about teaching, right, and skill acquisition. And it talks tremendously about that in terms of, which part of your brain's being involved in this? Are you actively, thinking about is it effortful from a mental perspective, or are you just letting it happen? And I think, again, that's part of the piece. Is I do really feel like there is real value in specific skill development, in block learning, in, like you say, getting in, saying 1,000 shots, things like that. I think there's some variability you can put in that block learning that can sometimes add some challenges and some specificity to what you're doing. But there's real value in being able to teach players to be aware of what they're doing and develop their kinesthetic awareness, while at the same time not, as you say, overthinking it, right? Of like being effortful. So what I would do with a player is try to isolate something for them to just be more aware of their own shots. So like, we're working on something, and I'm just saying, okay, let's just be aware of how the ball leaves your hands. I want you to just shoot, and I might even eliminate all things. I might not even shoot on a hoop. I might just have them shoot in the air, and I'll just toss it back to them, right? So there's no longer like a judgment of, did it go in or not? Did I miss? Did it, whatever, right? But I just want them to be aware of how the ball comes off. Does it come off these two? Does it come off that finger? Does it come off the middle? Like how is it leaving your hand? Or maybe we're being aware of their guide hand. Does it turn? Does my thumb have it? Or maybe I'm being aware of, is my elbow into the ball? Or what's my balance like? Or how do I come with my toes when I do it? And I think just this, non-judgmental awareness of yourself is starting to build a little bit of that, where so I'm not, telling them it. I'm just creating an own self-awareness as they're through their journey of learning skill, right? So that's kind of my approach, anyways.
Right. And basketball is such a game of X's and O's, but you and I both know that we don't train a basketball, we train people who play basketball.
Right.
What are some of the ways that you go about creating, say, buy-in, and at the same time making sure that your team has a solid culture where that everybody, it's a good learning environment for everybody?
Yeah, I think that's, something you certainly are challenged with all the time. And I love your term there, where or your phraseology a little bit there. I've always said something very similar to that is, I think where my philosophy changed as a basketball coach was realizing that I wasn't coaching basketball. I was coaching people, right? So, and I think that's a really key mind shift, I think can help you in what you're talking about, right? In terms of, like just getting them to buy in. And I think for me, once that mind shift happens, you can build trust. To me, trust is the most important piece of it. And there's trust on lots of different levels of that. Earlier in the conversation, I referred to, giving you the freedom as a coach to do different things and to lose. Well, that's a trust with your employer, with your sort of job security, with whoever's paying the bills for you to coach, or that kind of stuff. There's a certain trust of, we're going to allow you some rope here to make some mistakes, right? But then there's a little bit of a trust, and from the athletes towards you, in terms of, does this person have my best interest at heart? Are they just here to win games? Is this just ego? Is this for them, right? Are they doing it for them, or are they coaching for me? Once I can, sell it, and I'm not necessarily selling it, I have to just prove it in my actions in terms of, I'm there for you as an athlete and as a learner, right? That now builds a certain level of trust between me and the athletes that now can help that relationship grow and can help us sort of work together a little bit, right? So, and I have to trust them to some extent too, right? Where there's a certain amount where trust in terms of the way they're doing things and the way they're going to go about, their work and their, that kind of thing. So I think ultimately we're seeing the trust component on lots of different levels of that sort of web of trust, and has to get stronger and stronger for us to sort of take that culture further, right?
Cool. So obviously you've been doing this a long time. What is some advice that you would have for a 25-year-old Kirby just getting started
Sure.
as a coach? What are some of the things that you look back and would give advice to yourself at the very beginning, since you've been doing this for so long now?
Yeah, 25, I was already coaching for 7 years and made all kinds of mistakes. And so, yeah, I was, there's lots there where it's, I coached immediately out of high school. I took a junior high team, and I think I got lucky. I didn't know what the hell I was doing, first of all. But my brother and I coached an 8th grade team. My brother would have around 20 and I was around 17 or so. And we immediately won our little league championship. I think we were like 13-0 or 13-1 or something. We had had lucked into some talented players. It wasn't we had nothing to do with it, but it got me going a little bit, right? Where it's like, hey, this is fun and whatever. So it it can help a little bit. But if I were to go back, and there were some certain things that I ended up doing that I think was really helpful. And one, it was probably the most important, I would say, is getting reps. So just like a player, where if you want to be a good shooter, you better get thousands of reps, right? So if I want to be a good coach, I've got to get thousands of times communicating. So for me, for a 20-year period, I was coaching 5 teams a year, right? I was running summer camps all summer with hundreds and hundreds of kids a week that were coming through, and I was teaching all kinds of stuff. I was doing coach education where I was explaining to other coaches why I coach the way I coach, or how I thought we should coach, or having open discussions like this, right? Where we started to really analyze the why of what we're doing. So in terms of that, I was just getting thousands upon thousands upon thousands of reps. I would say there's no one, certainly in my part of Canada, that I think was coaching more than me. And just those acts of getting reps. I'm getting a rep right now, right? I'm learning how to communicate right now with you, right? So hopefully I've gotten just a tiny, tiny bit better at my skill of communicating here today. So I owe you one here. I owe you a beer somewhere where I can, so you helped me sort of get some reps right here today. So to me, that's a real big piece. And for me, don't say no to any opportunity. So I say this to our players all the time, is like, so much of, certainly getting opportunities is being in the right place at the right time. So, but I always say to them, the line I always like to use to them is, the right place at the right time has never been in your basement playing video games. It's never been the right place at the right time, right? So if you want to be at the right place at the right time, be in lots of places, lots of times. And you'll increase your chances of being in the right place at the right time. So putting yourself out there, don't say no to any opportunity. And then the last piece I say that I think I probably didn't do real well, that I think I probably should have done better, was pursue mentorship. So actually, I had some pretty good mentors, but I think I could have done a better job of actually pursuing people to learn from, put myself around them, go out to them and ask questions. Right? Find things to, like, I would, consume hundreds of, back then it was like VHS tapes of, Coach Don Meyer was incredible, or all different kinds of coaches. And I would just file through them and take notes and that kind of stuff. So in a way, I guess I got mentorship there, but I think for me, pursuing lots of different people to learn from is something I probably could have done better, and I would have done better, I think, than I did. So
how many years have you been coaching now?
28.
28. Okay. So reps. So you got obviously plenty of reps your first 15 years. What could you give? What was your biggest lesson, or a few biggest lessons from year, say, 25 to 28? Like, so
Wow.
you're now a veteran coach. Like, you've gotten plenty of hours in. What are some of the biggest lessons that you've gotten? Like,
I think in the last few years, I've done more about building relationships. Okay. So I think that's my biggest thing. Actually, I would say during the last 10 months during COVID, where I've started to see value, because I can't even go out and touch athletes, right? I can't go out and be with them, and as much as I want to do. We've been shut down here for a while, so the only thing I can do is build relationships. And then so it's interesting, we started to do, as many teams have, and certainly in North America, is Zoom calls like this, or maybe we're doing a Zoom workout, or we're doing a Zoom team building or whatever. And I think there's been value in that, creating a little bit of connectiveness as much as we can. But there's it's interesting, even in this format right here that you and I are in. You and I are having a great conversation here, and you can do that in a group of 2, in a group of 3, 4, or maybe even 5. But as soon as you get to a group of 15, that conversation starts to die, right? It starts to become more impersonal. Some people move to the peripheries of the conversation. Their video goes off. They disconnect. They could be over here, right? On the phone, whatever, doing stuff. And that's not great. So what I've started to do is I've had way more individual conversations. I've done way more individual meetings than I would have done in a normal season. And I think that's something that once we get out of this whole pandemic situation, hopefully the next year or so, is that I would take forward. I would start to do way more individual meetings, way more personal one-on-ones, way more. And some of them, we don't talk about basketball at all. We just talk about life, right? We just talk about where they are in their life, how are they doing socially, emotionally, where are they at in school, what's happening with their family, that kind of stuff. Like, and I think that to me is started to become probably the most recent lesson I'd say that I learned in coaching. So is the value of that.
Cool. Well, as we wrap up here, a couple more questions that I have for you is, for you, when it's all said and done and you decide that it's the day that it's time to put basketball aside and do whatever else there is, what would you like your legacy to be in the basketball world? What would you like to leave behind?
Yeah, and I shoot. So it's weird that I don't think of it that way. I don't have that, feeling of self-importance, right? Mm-hmm. So if I leave my house right now and I get hit by a bus tomorrow, right? You're still going to put this podcast out, and people are still going to play basketball and coach basketball, and so I don't know that I've had that big of a legacy necessarily, but I guess you hope that the thing that endures is your relationship you have with your athletes, I think, more than anything. And then the last piece is to look back on it and I think see, like, how much have you grown the game, right? How much has the game been impacted by things? And I think that's, to me, what I probably take the most pride in is if I look at, so I coaching the last 28 years is, how many of those athletes have gone on to do other things, not necessarily be the greatest players, but maybe they're officials, maybe they're sport administrators, maybe they're doing something where they're coaching and they're impacting people, right? And that kind of stuff. And how many of those people have gone on, so it was great. Maybe some kid played a year and then quit playing and, never played a game, which is fine, right? But how many of them kind of kept going with it, and how many of those players maybe were inspired to make an impact on someone else? So that, I think, is probably, certainly not in terms of a legacy, but something I think I would take the most pride in. So
nice. Well, Kirby, I really appreciate your time. You're very generous. You spend an hour with me, and I'm really grateful. And again, so thank you for coming on. I've learned a ton. And if you could just hold on to the line, I'll speak to you after then. And guys, thank you for tuning in to the Basketball Performance Podcast.